So I just want to get a bit of a show of hands here. Who has developed an add-on for Confluence Server? Cool, OK. So those people who put their hands up, how many of you want to bring that add-on across to cloud, to Confluence Cloud? OK, cool. So as Luke mentioned, what I'm going to be talking today about is how we rebuilt Confluence Questions, which is currently a Java or P2 plugin, as we call it, how we rebuilt it using Connect. Basically, what I'm going to be covering off is I will give you a bit of an overview for the people who aren't familiar with Confluence Questions of the product and some of its features. I'm then going to cover off the technology pillars that we use to rebuild Confluence Questions, and specifically, I'm going to talk about custom content. And then I'm going to move on to talking about the learnings of the project and the challenges that we inevitably faced. And then lastly, I'm going to cover off some of the capability differences between cloud and server add-ons. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with Confluence Questions, it is essentially a Q&A tool that allows you to build up a knowledge base. So what you see here is the homepage of Confluence Questions. It's essentially a list of the questions which can be sorted in different ways. In this particular case, it's sorted by most popular. You have another element within Confluence Questions, which are topics. So topics are essentially enhanced labels. They allow for users to sort of navigate through the questions in different ways that go beyond spaces. And then we have experts. So experts are users of Confluence Questions, and they have gathered reputation points, and those reputation points are accrued through votes for their answers and also for their answers when they're actually accepted. So when you click on a question, you're taken through to this page. So you see the title and the description of the question, and you also see the answers that are associated with that question. So on this page, you can add an answer should you wish. You could also comment on an answer or question. And the comments are really useful for broadening the discussion around a particular topic. And then lastly, you can vote on an answer and a question. So you can vote it up, you can vote it down if you're feeling really negative. You can also accept an answer if you were the person who posed the question. And so that really helps to provide a way for other users who have the same question to find the answer that they're looking for really quickly. So we actually use Confluence Questions pretty extensively within Atlassian. This is just an example that I pulled out of the HipChat space in our company-wide instance of Confluence. As you can see, it's a pretty pointed question, but we also have a lot of discussions at Atlassian. So we have a lot more general type questions like this one, which it raised a lot of discussion. You'd be surprised at how many answers this particular question had. So Confluence Questions, it's really important to us at Atlassian. And it's also important to our existing Confluence Questions customers. So you may ask, why did we even decide to rebuild this add-on using Connect? So I'd say that firstly, we wanted to make use of the raft of benefits that Connect offers. And I'm going to get into that a bit more later in the talk. But we really wanted to test out the technology that we offer to our ecosystem. We also wanted to test out developing features of Confluence as Connect services. And I would say that we felt it was really important when we undertook this project. We didn't want the add-on to be, we didn't want it to be privileged in any way. We wanted to make sure that we weren't using any workarounds that our ecosystem couldn't also use themselves. So we're going to have a look at some of the technology pillars that underpin the new version of Confluence Questions. So firstly, we have the Content REST API. Excuse me. So this is the API that is used to render, to create, update, delete, trash, all of the various content types that are available in Confluence. It does allow you to build child content. You can also use it to retrieve previous versions of content. And you can use it to comment, to like, to favorite content as well. This is CQL, which is the Confluence query language. So this is, it's basically, it has a CQL-like syntax, and it allows you to develop really powerful queries. So this language actually underpins the dashboards and the search of Confluence. So we use this tool, or this language rather, with Confluence Questions to expose questions within the dashboards and within search. We then have content properties. So these are, it's a platform capability that allows you to store data against the properties of custom content. And it can also, whilst it's a really powerful data store, it can be combined with CQL. So you can craft queries against those properties. So we actually use content properties in CQL to calculate votes. We use it to calculate accepted answers, and we also use it to bring together the list of questions that you saw on the homepage that are unanswered. And then lastly, we have custom content. So interestingly, this actually launched this time last year, and it was developed with Confluence Questions in mind as a test case. So what is custom content? It is, firstly, one of the patterns that we offer for Confluence Connect. And when I say patterns, what I'm referring to are basically reusable approaches to extending on the capabilities of Confluence. So you're probably most familiar with the first pattern, which is macros, and that is a way for add-ons to provide content through Confluence pages and blogs. We also have page extensions, so these allow your add-on to extend on the byline of a page, or you can also make use of the More Actions menu. We then have search extensions, so these allow you to utilize search filtering using the custom properties of content. And then blueprints are essentially singular or multiple templates that are accessed via the Create dialog in Confluence. Theming. So theming is a way that you can modify the look and feel of your space UI and also change the look and feel of the content that resides within those spaces. And then lastly, we have custom content. So custom content is a pattern, but it's also a Connect module in its own right. And it allows you to create a content type within Confluence. So just to kind of explain what I'm talking about when I talk about content types, within Confluence we have top-level content types, which are pages and blogs, and those are contained within a space. We then have content types that are contained within another content type. So things like comments and attachments, and those basically, they use the life cycle and restrictions of their containing content types. And then custom content. Custom content can take the form of either the top-level content, so like pages, or you can create custom content which is contained within another content type. So the reason for this is that custom content is architected using a containership model. So you can have custom content that resides within a space. This is the Confluence Questions example. And in that scenario, you have the questions contained within a space. From there, answers are contained within questions, and you can also have comments that are contained within answers or questions. But as I mentioned before, you can also have the other option employed, which is to have the content contained within another content type. So, for example, a page. And this is an example of a diagram add-on. So specifically, this is the model used by Glyphy diagrams. So content types basically allow you to provide dedicated views for your add-on. So you can have unique view, create, and edit UI for your particular requirements. And basically, when custom content is contained within a space, your content will appear within that space context, just like pages and blogs do, but you can customize that UI to your own requirements and to the requirements of your add-on. So for example, in the case of Confluence Questions, one of the unique elements is the input field at the top, which is used for both searching and also adding questions. So I just wanted to highlight this to make sure that everyone's aware that custom content isn't just about surfacing content via text elements. You can have a really rich experience, and you can have UI components that you've designed and that basically allow for your add-on to function as you need it to. So to summarize the benefits of a custom content add-on, you have full control of the user experience, which means that your vision can be fully realized. You are able to make use of the out-of-the-box integration with our search functionality, our dashboard navigation, and also with the space navigation. And then lastly, you are able to make use of the content properties for data storage, so it means that you don't have to worry about running a stateful server or about database backups, because that is already built in for you. So since custom content launched this time last year, we've actually had a number of vendors and developers take up the use of the module. So I just thought it'd be useful for you to, if you want to take a look at these add-ons later, you can actually see how custom content has been employed. So we have Good Software's analytics for Confluence Cloud. Kamala Tech's Kamala Approvals has made use of this. We have VC's Atlas CRM and Adaptivist Forms for Confluence. Glyphy Diagrams, as I mentioned before. And just recently, TopDocs launched their Office 365 files and sharing add-on, which uses custom content. So I'd recommend you take a look at all of those. So let's take a look at how questions are declared as custom content. So you basically start by defining two modules within your descriptor, which is the JSON file used for your Connect add-on. So the first is the general pages module, and this provides a URL to the add-on's UI, which is visible whenever a user accesses a question, whether it's from a questions list or from search, for example. And this has been named here as Question Viewer. And then the next module to be defined is the Custom Content module. And so this is named Confluence Question, and you'll notice that you have here UI support and API support. So the default content types, as I mentioned before, have the native experience, but of course you're able to define your own UI. So within the UI support, you can define the user interface that you want to be using. Here it's been named as Question Viewer, and you'll also see that included here is the list view of questions, which is named Questions Space List. The API support is where the container types are defined, as well as the supported child types. And so you'll see here that we have defined questions within the space container, and the supported child types are the answers, which are associated with the questions. So the other component which is outlined within the API support is the built-in content indexing, which is enabled to be true here. So this brings me to the learnings part of this talk. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, we did encounter some challenges, but I'm going to start with the good stuff, and that is that there is a lot to like about Confluence Connect. So when with rebuilding Confluence Questions on Connect, we were actually able to decouple the add-on from Confluence. And the benefit of that is that we are now able to employ rapid development and deployment. There's no need to rely on Confluence to push through updates. And the benefit there for our customers is that we will be able to ship features more quickly. And we'll also, let's say when it comes to bug fixes, we will be able to get those out there much more rapidly. Next, Connect's sandbox UIs and remote APIs mean that Confluence Questions will be much more resilient, and in terms of having that layer of abstraction between Confluence and add-ons, this of course helps Confluence as well to become more robust. So the APIs offer proper change control, which means that for those using or developing server add-ons, there's no need to worry about constant changes with APIs. In terms of the tech stacks, when it comes to server add-ons as a point of comparison, obviously there's a very restricted tech stack. You are going to be using Java. But when it comes to Connect add-ons, they actually extend completely over standard web protocols and APIs such as HTTP and REST. So the benefit of this is that it really opens up options around programming languages and deployment, but you can still use Java if you want to. So I will point out that there are two supported frameworks two frameworks supported by Atlassian. Those are Node.js and also Spring Boot. But we have plenty of developers who are using alternative frameworks, so there are no sort of strict limitations around that. In terms of Confluence Questions, we are actually using Spring Boot microservice, and it has a React.js single-page application front end. Another benefit, which I've touched on before, is the built-in search indexing. So it was super easy to get this up and running and to have questions exposed via the components of the dashboard and search. So, and in addition to that, quick search as well as the full search listings. And also the navigation link that's included within Spaces appears with this functionality as well. So that was all very easy to bring together. But overall, the team found that custom content made it really easy to build the two content types, so questions and answers. And the rich integration with Confluence using CRUD operations meant that it was really easy to hook up the add-on with the customized UI. Using the REST API also meant that we could make use of benefits such as expansions. So with the use of that, we could easily, as an example, pull together all of the answers associated with the question with just one REST call. So, the challenges. Firstly, this is probably the most obvious statement in the world, but I'm going to say it, P2 and Connect are different. And I think that that's worth saying because it tends to be that the framework that you're most familiar with is probably going to skew your version of the other. The feedback that we've had from some developers who have started with Java is that when they come to Connect, they find it really limiting. And alternatively, those developers who have started with Connect and then move on to Java or P2, they find it really unwieldy and confusing. So ultimately, it's really like comparing apples and oranges. The frameworks are different because they support different environments, and they also, in addition, support customers who have different expectations. So extensibility is one of the reasons that customers choose to run our applications on their hardware. But customers who are choosing cloud are willing to give up some of that control in favor of convenience. So if you're giving up control, those customers who are on cloud, they want to have simple administration, they want to have good performance, and they want to have really easy integrations with their other SaaS tools. So my point here is that the customers are willing to make trade-offs, and subsequently, the frameworks need to be making trade-offs as well. So the key tip here, I would say, is be aware of the differences of the two frameworks. Make sure you really understand the impact that those differences will have on the architecture of your add-on, the development of your add-on, and also the user experience of your add-on. And that leads me to the point of be aware of lift and shift. And by lift and shift, I mean basically thinking that you can take your server add-on and bring it directly across to cloud without any consideration around its design. So what you see here is the architecture of Confluence Questions, and it includes not just the content types, but some of its interactions and its features. And what I hope that this diagram communicates is that despite the fact that you may think that Confluence Questions is a pretty simple product, it's actually very complex. And so the development we found of the core components of Confluence Questions, super easy using custom content. But it was the development of some of the more peripheral features that we found to be a lot more challenging. So I'd say here that this is where the 80-20 rule applies. Questions and answers probably took about 20% of the effort, and the additional features outlined there, which are probably more peripheral, certainly ended up taking 80% of the effort. So as an example, reputations, we made the decision to move the data storage outside of Confluence into an external database, and subsequently the development of that feature was much more extensive and took longer than we anticipated. So I'd highly recommend conducting a technical spike before you start the development of your add-on to really understand the effort required. And once you have that understanding, you can make better assessments around what is a truly necessary or a core feature of your add-on. For those of you who are developing a new add-on for both server and cloud, you obviously have the benefit of being able to consider both frameworks at the same time and to see whether you can actually employ strategies like shared front-end code to make the development process easier in the long run. So in the instance of Confluence Questions, we did actually have to make some difficult decisions around which features we were going to continue to support. And we have decided to deprecate a few features, such as one of them is permission-based reputations. And that came down to the fact that the development of that feature was really non-trivial, and it related as well to the usage that we were seeing of that feature on the existing add-on. Overall, most of the features will be retained within Confluence Questions, but I would recommend that if you are, through your transition, removing a lot of the feature set of your add-on, then you may actually want to reconsider rebranding the add-on, because obviously the branding of your add-on will set expectations for your customers, and it may make things more difficult if you are trying to advertise the same product using the same name. So let's take a look at some of the capability differences between cloud and server. So firstly, P2 add-ons are inherently hosted on customer hardware. When it comes to Connect add-ons, it is up to the developer to host the add-on themselves. And if this is a concern for you, I'd highly recommend you taking a look at a guest post on the Atlassian blog, which was written by Daniel Wester about how to host a lean Atlassian add-on for, I think it's under $40 a month. And so I've included a URL there for you to check out. Secondly, Connect add-ons can't access the product database. So for Confluence Questions, this was actually a big shift because we were using the product database in the the Java plugin version of the add-on. So you'll need to be replacing database queries with calls to the product REST API, or otherwise you need to be storing data in the microservice itself. For Confluence Connect, notifications aren't currently available, so you will need to employ a service that you've set up yourselves. For Confluence Questions, we are going to be using an internal service, so that is something to keep in mind. And then this is something to reiterate as well. Custom content lives in spaces. So for those of you who are familiar with the existing version of Confluence Questions, you'll know that we have what I like to call spaceless questions, so questions that aren't inherently associated with a space. With that version of the add-on, the questions are stored in a table in Confluence, but of course we're restricted by the REST API structure, so we had to really rethink what would happen with those spaceless questions in the new version. And what we ended up doing was we created a default space where all of those spaceless questions would be stored. And it has actually resulted in quite a bit of thinking going into the user experience around that. We do still have a global experience on offer for Confluence Questions, but that is really just the aggregation of the questions as you saw with the homepage screen grab. And then, of course, as you're all aware with from the sessions, we do have the new design guidelines coming into place. So again, for server add-ons versus cloud add-ons, you will have to have two different looks and feels for your add-ons. So with the ADG3 guidelines, those will obviously only be employed for cloud at this point in time. So as a result of this project and the requirements from Confluence Questions, we actually have had a couple of things that we've developed that the ecosystem will be able to make use of. Firstly, the project pushed forward our Relations API for custom content. So we have incorporated webhooks for content created, updated, and deleted. And we're actually using these to calculate our voting. And in addition to that, we're using them to trigger notifications. Secondly, we are going to be offering permissions for custom content. So permissions are obviously really important for Confluence Questions, and it was something that we really had to build out. This isn't yet available, but it should be pushed out in the next couple of weeks and available for all custom content add-ons. So this brings us to the end of the talk. You may be wondering what the status of Confluence Questions on Connect is. We are going to be rolling it out in probably, it's about 3 weeks' time. It is going to be a progressive rollout. I guess the complication that we do have is that there is an element of customer migration that is going to be factored in. We have quite a big project around that to migrate those customers across to the new version of Connect. But should you wish to find out more about Confluence Connect and more specifically custom content, you can have a look at some guides and tutorials which are available via this URL. And that's it. Thank you. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Don't be shy. Thanks.